a solution for the future, taking note, serious note, of the experiences of the past. And one of those experiences was those people who survived the massacre of prisoners in a desert region called Dasht-I-Leili. And many of these prisoners were put on containers. In fact, it's reported that there were at least 30 containers, metal shipping containers, in which at least 250 prisoners were placed. And these are shipping containers in which it is impossible to breathe. And the reports say by leading New York Times journalists that the death by container took place of hundreds of prisoners in these containers, where out of each one, perhaps 2 or 3 people survived, the rest died. And how did they die? What was the circumstances in which they died? What were they doing the moment they died? We're going to hear from our dear brother who's joined me from Tipton and has survived and lived to tell the tale several times, not least in the film in which he's featured called Road to Guantanamo. Ruhul Ahmed, tafadhal. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Before we go into your own experience, I just want to ask you something. I asked you what you knew about Qala-I-Jangi. What had you ever heard about it? And you told me that some of those people who survived the massacre of Qala-I-Jangi were taken to the prison where you were held in Sheberghan. Can you just tell me something that you heard about that?
The only person I know of who was in Qala-I-Jangi was a brother called Farouk. From what I know, what I remember, he was an Arab individual, either from Saudi or from Yemen. And I remember him clearly enough, I remember him quite often, because he was brought to my cell, to my room, where there was a lot of people, and he was heavily injured. So he had a bullet wound that went through his shoulder. It came out through the front into his jaw. I took the entire face, took the entire jaw out. So he came with bandages, and he had 2 straws into his nostrils where he was bandaged, the way he could breathe from. And eventually he passed. So that's the only person I know of being in Qala-I-Jangi. The others I knew of, they also ended up in Guantanamo with me. And my friend who travelled with me to Afghanistan, Munir, a childhood friend, was also in Qala, and he also was one of the shaheeds of Qala.
So this is something you learned later afterwards?
After, yes.
After, okay. All right, so let's just get to your story. And sorry, before we go to this, I don't know if everybody heard this clearly. The brother Farouk who died, he died in your arms.
Correct.
And they put 2 straws into his nostrils so that he could breathe.
He could breathe there, because he didn't have a jaw anymore.
He had no jaw,
pretty much no tongue, no chin. And when you look at it, when you look at him from the side, he just had the entire face, the bottom half was completely gone. So survival for that brother was virtually impossible. And eventually he passed.
So you and what's known as famously the Tipton Three, or you are one of the Tipton Three, and in fact, as you said, there were 4 of you, and you found out later that Munir died in Qala-I-Jangi, which is something I didn't know. But so the 3 of you were in the Kunduz region, and then you were captured alongside Taliban and alongside civilians. Tell me the process of how they put you into these vehicles and containers.
So the night before we actually went to the containers, we had to go to like this desert region where the Taliban fighters were told to surrender, so we were told also to go. And that night, it was just after Isha, we had to sit in a certain place and wait for the vehicles to come. And that night we got bombed upon by the Americans. The whole night was a complete nightmare. The next morning we wake up, we didn't sleep, we were running around. And there was many people who got killed. So what we did was we went back to the bazaar, we bought shovels, we buried the ones who was dead, the ones who were injured we couldn't help, we had to leave. After the Dhuhr time, we continued to walk as we were told to move on. And eventually there was like a border kind of a line made where everybody was, the Taliban were surrendering the arms, guns and whatever, and then tied everybody up. They marched us through a desert for pretty much 6-7 hours.
So at this point, were you also tied up?
Yeah, our hands were tied. Hands were tied from the back with a rope or.
So they take your hands from behind your back and then they get a sheet and tie your arms.
Yeah, it's either with ropes or they had belts or whatever they could find.
Okay.
Generally, it was the turbans. They cut into pieces and tied our hands back, and then obviously we was marched through the desert for. It was a good 6 hours. We walked and walked and walked. Eventually, we came to a place where we had to sit. We stayed the night there. The next morning, they put us onto some trucks, and then we drove for a few hours. We got to another place. I don't know where it was, and then in that process of being in the truck, me and Shafiq were together, as if kind of disappeared. We lost him. So when we got to near the trucks where we could see all these containers, I said to Shafiq that we shouldn't get on the ones that are limited containers. There was trucks that was made of canvas. And I said to him, we should get onto that one. And alhamdulillah, me and Shafiq, we managed to get onto that. And as you said, there must have been at least over 200 people in these big, long vehicles where we had to sit with our knees to our chest. We couldn't, relax. We couldn't relax our legs, or we couldn't stand. It was uncomfortable. After being in the trucks in that container for probably a couple of hours, 2 hours, it was Maghrib time. We heard gunshots. I wasn't sure at the time what the gunshots were for, only to later to find out the brothers who were in the metal containers, they started banging because they couldn't breathe, and then hence why the Northern Lions, they shot bullet holes into the containers, but not the top, on the bottom.
And so we know now that people were suffocating in the containers. They were suffocating to death. So the reports from the New York Times say that the people were literally squashed in like sardines, standing against one another. 250 odd people. So he wasn't in the canvas container with you, but he was in the metal container.
Correct. Yes.
You learned later what happened to him. Can you tell me what he said happened to him?
What he said was, he got into the container, he thought nothing wrong at all, not wrong with it at all, sat down, just was waiting like everybody else. They wasn't sure what was going on, so people start fighting, they start arguing, and then someone said that I can't breathe, and then start banging the side of the wall of the container and asking the guards to open the doors. And then what he said was, people started to faint, and he also passed out. And he said he only woke up when he got to Sheberghan, when they opened the doors. When he felt the fresh air come in, he actually opened his eyes. And he said when he woke up, he was actually buried under bodies. So he had to fight his way out from those who had passed from suffocation or who got shot when they were sitting on the wall of the container. So he pushed himself out, and he got shot himself in his elbow. So that's what he told me.
So Asif, for those of you who don't know, is one of the Tipton Three. He's from Tipton in the West Midlands. He's one of Roy's childhood friends. And one of the things I remember he told me, and has been widely reported, is that because they were so thirsty,
There was wiping the condensation from the top with the. He ripped his kurta.
His shirt.
Yeah. And he gathered. He made the condensation. He wiped it out so it was wet, and he squeezed his shirt to drink. Yeah.
And then I also read that reports said that people actually bit into the bodies to drink the blood to get some kind of drink, something to drink. I don't know if you heard this.
No, I never heard that.
Okay, one of the reports actually say this. One of the reports.
It's possible, yeah. In that at that time, you would do anything to survive.
Yeah. How old were you at the time?
19, 18.
And you just experienced or in the process of experiencing America's, or the worst massacre of prisoners in America's history. America's bloody history. What was going through your mind?
My family.
Sorry to ask you these questions. But
Would I see my family again? My mom.
you said that there were some of the prisoners that began to lose their grip on reality. But there's something that you told me that you said you weren't going to do that.
I mean, when I was young, I was 18, so for me it was different because I didn't have a wife, I didn't have kids, I didn't have the responsibility as a father does, or a husband does. So just me. Some of the people who were married, they had kids. You know, they lost their emotions. They basically gave up because the situation was so bad that they knew. Even I believed that I will die. This is probably going to be my final moments in life. And when you know, or you believe that you will die in the matter of, a minute or two, or an hour, or a day, people usually lose their mind. You see people change, and I mean, I was young, so I didn't have that thought in my mind that, oh, what's going to happen to my wife? Who's going to look after my child? Who's going to do this? Who's going to feed them? Who's going to clothe them? None of that was my concern. The only concern was, will I ever see my mum again? My dad, my brothers, my sisters. So yeah, I didn't lose it. I just thought, okay, this is going to be probably the last few moments of my life, and I just prayed. I just prayed. That's what I could remember. Just sit, calm, relax. But the guys who were older and who had family, they struggled to deal with the situation.
So in this vehicle, you remember you heard these shots being fired, and when Asif was telling you the story about, so this story then comes together.
Yeah, then he comes together. Then I understood why I could hear the shooting and people screaming. And obviously, before I got to the prison in Sheberghan, they took us off. As I've walked off my truck, when I came out, I could see the Northern Alliance, their soldiers, grabbing the dead bodies from the containers behind me and in front of me, and just throw them on the floor. So obviously, I kind of worked it out that they either they were shot, they've died somehow. I didn't realise they suffocated because I never knew until Asif had told me.
And when you were in the Sheberghan prison itself, that was a hellhole where you saw several people die. Somebody died in your arms. There was no food. There was
no
tell me the
food.
conditions.
The prison condition was like terrible. It was winter. You know, it was freezing cold. It was Ramadan.
You had no change of clothes, no warm clothes. Wearing the same clothes.
Yeah, so same clothes. And I was there for 4 weeks. So the first week and a half or so, we had no food, just water. The rooms were small. There was probably about 5 meters by 5, and there was about at least 35 to 40 people. We couldn't sit there. We had to sit with our knees to our chest, and we had to sleep in turns. So there would be like 15 guys sleeping first half the night, and then we would swap. And even the corridors were just absolutely, full. I mean, there must have been thousands of people in the cells. We had no food, we had no water for the first week and a half. We had water, and it was freezing cold. We had no jackets.
And amongst you were several wounded people with terrible wounds.
Yeah, there was people who had like bullet wounds, they had shrapnel injuries. Elderlies. There was elderly men there who passed away because they couldn't.
And you, as this young man, about 19 years old, are watching people being taken away, their bodies being taken away. And again, what's going through your mind? Are you thinking that your turn's next at any point?
At that time, it's just hard to. I just had to deal with the day. Every day I had to deal. I said to myself, today, I need to get through today. I need to get through today. Oh, tomorrow, there's no guarantee. Especially in that kind of situation, you can't think, tomorrow I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do this. You just think, okay, I need to deal with it today. And I dealt with the day on a daily basis. I prayed a lot. I never prayed that much in my life. Alhamdulillah. It was hard, but it was also a massive blessing at the same time. And I say this to all my friends. And they said to me, would you change going back to Afghanistan? I said, no, I wouldn't.
What's the reason?
Because it brought me close to my deen.
SubhanAllah.
And I wasn't a guy who practiced deen.
And do you think this incident, this period, more than Guantanamo,
Guantanamo was a walk in the park compared to Sheberghan. I had it good. I'm not going to say it was hard. It was hard, it was hard, but it wasn't as hard as that month in Sheberghan and them few days walking through the deserts before Sheberghan.
Were you aware of the mass graves? Were you aware of the mass?
Yeah, I was aware.
Yeah. And what happened? How did you find out?
When I got in Sheberghan, we heard about it from the survivors who survived. And the Red Cross asked us about it as well. Said, did you see any mass graves? Did you see like the piles of bodies? I seen the pile of bodies. I didn't see the mass graves.
But you saw them digging something outside, right?
I mentioned to you before that I did see like they dug something, and I mean obviously they was taking those people who died in the containers. They was taking them out and throwing them on the floor. So I'm guessing it was for them.
And you stayed there this time. Did you have any hope? Were your hopes building about what's going to happen next, where you're going to go, or which direction they are going to take you?
No, I gave up hope. I just thought this is going to be the last day. And I just accepted my fate.
Tell me something about some of the other prisoners. Any examples of any individuals, anything you saw about how people dealt with that situation? I know that you said that some people had lost their will and lost but were there others who...
There was many. I mean, there was many examples I can give you. Some people were patient, some people were... There was a lot of fights in the camps because there was no food. When the food was distributed, there was no... it wasn't organised well. So they just threw the food at you, and everybody kind of behaved like animals. So people's patience were running thin. And I've seen many people who passed away, young and old, from various injuries or just natural causes of the situation.
And at which point, was there any point in Sheberghan where any of the Americans came, or was that much afterwards?
They came on the day that they took me out, which was a month later. That was the first time I've seen the Americans there.
Okay. And did you think that now you are safe, or what did you think?
I did actually, yeah. You see an American, I never knew that there was American, they look white to me, so maybe them Brits or from Europe. Mm. But until I come close to them, I see the badge, the flag on the arm, I thought, okay, they're Americans, and I thought, okay, thank God. So alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah for the Americans.
But it didn't work.
Did you put in your mind together that these are the same guys that are dropping the bombs?
Yeah, of course.
That was in your head?
Of course. But you believe in the rule of law. And you think, okay, they might be bombing the Taliban, and it's got nothing to do with me. You know, surely they're going to take me, they'll ask me questions, they'll put me through a process, and eventually they'll hand me over to the Brits. Then I'll go home.
Jazakallah khair. Sorry to ask you painful questions, Bo. I know I asked you some of these questions on the way here, but for our audience over here, it's important that they see this as a record of history, because you will not hear this story anywhere else in England. You will not hear it. Nobody will allow you to listen to it. Nobody will give it a space. Nobody wants to listen. If you look at, for example, and I'll tell you this so you have an understanding, the Physicians for Human Rights began an investigation by going to Dasht-I-Leili and looking at the mass graves and started to take a tally and record about what was happening. They sought to bring some kind of accountability and start an investigation. And bear this in mind, it began under Bush, under President Bush, but the investigation was closed down by Barack Obama in 2013 without any explanation. Several reports of various award-winning journalists in the United States of America have stated that at every leg of the journey, the United States of America government would not cooperate and would not be willing to share information about what happened.